what you did for the beginning of your career. So I'd love to hear how you got into modeling, growing up in Ireland, and then, the move and sort of the transition into TV and film. And then, Diana, I would just, again, love to hear we're going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, in another panel over the weekend, but just sort of about the inception of Outlander, how it kind of came about, and if you've always been into writing and, being an author. Yeah.
All right, wow. So I was studying theatre in Dublin, and the plan was always to be an actor. But I was collecting money for a charity with a couple of girls in my class, and we were packing bags at a supermarket for multiple sclerosis, and this guy was doing shopping, and he gave me his card, and he was like, give us a call. And those 3 cashiers were from very inner city Dublin. They were like, your one just got asked to be a model. So that was how I started modeling part-time in Dublin, and then I took a year out of college and never went back. But I moved to Paris and was doing all of that I did it for almost 10 years. But the whole time I always wanted to get back to acting. And you get sort of time flies, but I was living in New York and I was starting to get towards 30. And I was like, if I don't do this now, I never will. So I moved to LA and I just started taking classes, and one teacher introduced me to a manager, and then I started going on auditions and little bits of jobs, but it wasn't until they optioned Outlander and they were doing this show that, obviously this has been my huge big break, and it's been a wild and wonderful ride. So I've this woman to thank for everything.
It's amazing. The business card from the strange gentleman doesn't always work out that way.
No, luckily it was in public and we vetted them before I went to a weird office and by myself. But yeah, it worked out all right.
Had you read the series before or been familiar with it and kind of knew about it?
No, so originally when I got the first audition, I was given just 2 lines, and it was something like 1940s nurse, confident, does something. And I didn't know, and so when I heard that they wanted to see me again, I found out more, and I found out it was a book series. And I lived in LA at the time, and one of my favorite bookstores, Book Soup, in West Hollywood, if anyone knows it, it's right around the corner. So I called them and I was like, do you have this book? And they were like, yes, we've 1 copy left. And I was like, hold on to it, I'm coming. And I went up and I bought the first book, and as I was paying for it, the guy is like, they're making a series out of this. And I was like, oh really? Okay. He's like, yeah, Ron D. Moore is doing it. I wrote my thesis on him. And I was like, oh, okay. So I took that as a good omen.
Yeah.
And I read it in like 3 days over Labor Day weekend 5 years ago.
Wow.
So pretty much very soon that'll be our anniversary.
Diana, tell us about the series and how it sort of incepted in your mind, and then how it got to the page and sort of the development of it.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll boil it down for the moment into a one-reeler. Basically, I had always wanted to be a novelist. I've known since the age of 8 that that's what I was supposed to do. I just didn't know how. I mean, nobody does. And I came from a very conservative family background. My dad was fond of saying to me, "You're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum," he'd say. "So be sure you get a good education so you can support your children." So with this going on at home, I thought I wouldn't announce that I wanted to write books for a living, because even at that age, I understood that you didn't make much money from books. So I went into science. I liked science, I was good at it, but I still knew I was supposed to be a novelist. When I turned 35, I said, well, Mozart was dead at 36, maybe you should get a move on just in case. And so I said, okay, my next birthday I'm going to start writing a novel, just to learn how. Because, the basic truth here is you can take all the writing classes you want to, but it won't teach you how to write. Nothing teaches you how to write except the act of writing. I mean, that's just what it is. And people sit down and they try for a paragraph and they say, oh, well, it's not flowing, I must not be a writer, and they give up. And I said, look, ballerinas are not born on their toes, you gotta practice at this. And at that point I had written a lot, but it was all nonfiction of various kinds. And so I said, okay, what's the easiest kind of book I could practice on? I'm not gonna show it to anyone, I'm not even gonna tell anyone what I'm doing. But I need to write a novel just to see what it takes to get from one end to the other. So I said, what's the easiest thing? And I thought, well, maybe historical fiction. I was a research professor. I knew my way around a library. I said, it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record, which actually works pretty well. And so I said, okay, historical fiction, where shall I set it? Got no background in history. So I was just looking around and thinking, American Civil War, Russian World War II, what sounds good? And in this malleable frame of mind, I saw a really old Doctor Who rerun. It was one of the second Doctor's shows, Patrick Troughton, in which he had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745. This was a young man in his early 20s who was in his kilt. I said, well, that's kind of fetching. And I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church, and I said, well,
your poor father,
Well, I don't claim divine inspiration, but anyway, I said, okay, you want to write a book, it doesn't really matter where you start, the important thing is get started. So I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters, just the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt.
It's amazing how much images that can conjure up.
Very powerful, compelling image. Some years later in Germany, I was doing an interview with someone from a literary magazine, and he said, oh, I've read all your books, they're wonderful, your imagery is terrific, your characters are so 3D, it's just transcendental, and I'm thinking, yes, go on. And instead he paused and said, there is just this one thing, I wonder, what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? I was really tired at this point, or I might not have said it. I just looked at him for a minute and I said, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute.
And thus, Outlander was born.
But that's where it started, was with a man in a kilt, and that seems to be where we still are, more or less.
Amazing. Well, let's get to these questions, because we have a little amount of time, and I know a bunch of people are up. So let's